So I'm with Andy Atkins-Kruger from WebCertain. We're at the London SES Conference 2010. What have you thought of the conference so far?
Well, SES London this year has been an outstanding conference with excellent content, and certainly the panels I've been involved with, Global SEO and the Global SEO Site Clinic, and also the industry-specific strategies, they were superb. And I think the London version of SES has always had an international kind of flavour to it, but the audience this time was the most international I've ever seen. So, you know, from my point of view, specialising in that field, you can imagine that that's quite good. So, great conference.
Brilliant, and that's one of the exciting things about London, is just it's a melting pot for Europe. One question though, is it worth link building? If I'm targeting a UK search engine, is it worth me link building in another language?
Well, if what you're targeting is a UK English-speaking audience with English links, you're probably better off actually spending your resources on the UK. But if what you're trying to become is more of an international player that ranks in other, English-speaking markets, for instance, then you would be wise to get international links in multiple markets to get that international flavour. But generally speaking, it's best to go for local links in the markets you're targeting as a general rule.
And are there kind of cultural nuances about link building? So do you have a kind of strategy for different countries and what might work in one country versus the next?
Well, you certainly get sort of regulatory problems cropping up in certain sectors, where you're simply not welcome to create links for casinos in some markets for the sake of argument. So, that drives people to look at alternative methods of creating links. But from a cultural point of view, I think the main difference is in the agencies and how they behave, rather than in the public, because the public still searches in relatively similar ways, and they're not necessarily concerned about how the link network has been made up. So I think it's more the agencies that lead that than the public.
Okay, and also when you've got a multilingual site, does essentially the same piece of text written in English and then also translated into French, does that count as duplicate content? Does that affect your keyword density?
Well, it certainly affects your keyword density, but it's not duplicate content because you've got completely different characters, if you like, on the page. So there's no way that's duplicate at all. As far as keyword density is concerned, the main issue with translating content is that people translate keywords, and obviously when you do that, you lose the magic component that is the way that people have sort of abbreviated their thoughts in a specific keyword. And that doesn't marry up between different languages. So you have to do your keyword research, specifically for each language, and obviously then incorporate that within the content that's on your site. And you might find you've got to target 3 times as many keywords in one particular country or language, because there just isn't a single top keyword that you might have found in English, for example.
Right, that's interesting. And also, when you've got sort of dialects, but you've got dialects in Spanish, or every language has a different dialect. How much do you need to kind of cater for those, or is there a kind of formal language that people tend to stick with?
Well, from a commercial point of view, which is obviously most of the clients that we're working with are targeting specific commercial audiences, they're going to choose the languages that give them the best result. So you pick the Spanish example, and obviously there's Catalan as well as Castilian versions of Spanish nominally. But of course the people that speak those languages don't call them dialects, or don't regard them as dialects, they regard them as their language. And that's a fairly significant example because, Google does actually have results for both Catalan and Castilian Spanish. But in general terms, people mainly are looking to target the top level main language in a particular market.
So for, say, a country like Singapore, which speaks English, Malay and Chinese, I mean, what would your advice be to someone targeting that country? Do they need to translate into every language?
Well, that comes back to their objectives, but I think you've picked on one of those particular markets that's really interesting for us as a consultancy, alongside Switzerland and Belgium and Canada, where you've got a country that has several different languages. And you've then got issues about how you split your site between those different markets using a domain in order to represent, to get the best result. And the typical advice is to go for to have your site appear first on the main local domain in the major language. So in Switzerland, that would be German, for instance, would be the language you came across first on the site, but then with options to click through to the other languages. And that's normally the best way to do it. But it does depend on who you're targeting. And if you're specifically targeting English speakers in Singapore, then English is going to be the right way to go.
I mean, there is a kind of, what's the word, impression sometimes in some countries that English is the language of the upper classes. I mean, is that just a lazy attitude? Is the reality that now we're all speaking our native tongues?
I think that comes mainly from Westerners who think that their language is the most important because there's more people speaking it than any others. But people who speak a language in a particular market don't necessarily regard their language as elite or a preferred language. So yes, you're probably right. It's related to laziness on the part of people not doing their research to find out the best way to target the people in that country.
And finally, just a quick tactic for sites with multiple languages. Should we be interlinking all these sites together? Should we be trying to spread anchor text, in a multilingual way on one website?
Well, that's a very big question, and I think the main issue with multilingual sites is the way that you change the country and the language. And one of the common errors is that happens on the homepage of the .com, on a .com only site. And the problem with that is there's no content then on the homepage. So it's best to have the language chooser page, if you like, on a separate URL, and that's then a facility to provide all of the link equity through the whole site from that point. The other thing that's a bit of a problem is pop-up windows and even modular windows that drop down, all those kind of devices aren't particularly good at passing the link value around the site. So best to think carefully about the geo-selection, as we would call it, to get the best value from the whole of the network of sites that you own.
Brilliant, great tips. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.